Hello everybody, June here. Today I want to talk to you about pattern drafting books for your 19th century costumes, outfits, whatever you want to call them. And in this case, when I say 19th century, I am unfortunately referring to the second half of the 19th century because the kinds of drafting systems that these books use are systems that were not developed until at least the late 1860s, beginning of the 1870s. So before that, there were certainly patterns that you could buy, but they were mostly patterns that you bought already drafted and graded, or patterns that came in a single size in a magazine and then you had to enlarge. The kind of drafting that I am going to show you today, that I'm going to talk about today, are the apportioning style of drafting, which means you use a body measurement. In the case of these books, you use the bust for the upper half of the outfits, and then you use the waist measurement for the lower half of the outfits. So these are kinds of systems that were used both by tailors, but also by people at home, and they were marketed, especially later, in the later parts of the 19th century, they were marketed directly to women, to people at home. And you could buy the sets, you could buy the rulers, you could buy the booklets, you could buy all kinds of things. So this is an alternative to, well, today anyway, it's an alternative to buying commercial patterns. For a variety of reasons, you may not want to do that. Either they don't come in your size, maybe you have other kinds of issues with the owners of the companies, and I can think of at least two at the moment off the top of my head that I no longer purchase from, etc. And the great thing about these systems is that it doesn't matter what your measurements are. There is a ruler for your body. So it is limited, but less limited than most of the commercial patterns out there. And as I talk about the books, I will show you the rulers so that you can see what kinds of measurements we're talking about here. And there are really only two authors that I'm going to talk about, and these are all modern people who have taken these pattern diagrams and booklets from the 19th century and sort of repackaged them and put them in a book. So you can find a lot of these things online free, but you have to do a lot of the legwork, and you would especially have to figure out the ruler system, which I'll talk about in a moment. So anyway, let's start with the 1870s. For the 1870s, there are two books, both titled Fashions of the Gilded Age, and they are by Francis Grimble. As you can see here, they cover slightly different things. So volume 1 has the underpinnings, bodices, skirts, overdresses, etc. And then volume 2 concentrates a little bit more on evening, bridal, sportswear, outerwear, and things like that. And let's have a quick look inside volume 1. So these are all the tabs for the things I want to make, but it comes with a pretty good explanation of what the systems were like. So in the case of the Fashions of the Gilded Age, these two books here, Grimble gives us a drafting system that was used by a tailor in Germany. So they are not as easily available in the US perhaps as the later ones might be. So this is just the index. Let's move on to the intro. So the introduction is full of fantastic information about the system, about how it works, about how to work with the system. And in the Fashions of the Gilded Age, she includes not only a portioning system, but also diagrams from like Harper's Bazaar. And these are the kind that came before apportioning systems, where you basically had to trace this, not unlike Berta patterns today, but they were a single size. You had to trace it, and then you had to adjust it to your size. So she uses both kinds in here. But I'm more interested in the apportioning drafting than I am in the other kinds of patterns. So let's find one of the apportioning drafting patterns. And towards the front of the book, she does give you a lot of information about how to adjust patterns, about drafting blocks, which comes from the original systems. Okay, let's go to a tab since I know that's where they are. So here, for example, is a corset for a stout woman. As I'm sure you know, heavier people tend to have slightly different proportions, and people are not heavy the same everywhere. So the drafting of this corset might be a little different than, say, the drafting of this one. And sometimes they will give you information in the body of the instructions that came with the pattern about the measurements. And sometimes they do tell you you can use this for up to X chest measurement or X bust measurement. And so this is what the patterns look like. And the way that it works is you choose a ruler, which is in the back, based on your bust measurements. Sometimes it will be your full bust, so all the way around. Sometimes it will be your half bust. And Francis Grimble has done the work of making the rulers for you. Obviously, the book is only so big, so you will have to print them out, and then you'll have to tape some of them together to make it the length that it needs to be. And all of the measurements that you see here, the measurements are exactly the same regardless of what size your bust is. The only thing that changes is the size of the tape. So a measurement of 16 on a bust size 36 will be obviously smaller than a measure of 16 in a bust size 44. But you don't have to worry about doing the math because it is all here. You just go exactly by the diagram. You just use a slightly larger measuring tape. And that is why it's called an apportioning system. And so here, I believe is the half bust measure. And you can see that it goes all the way up to a half bust of 26 inches. So you do the math, twice that would be your full bust. And then the second book in the series, in the Gilded Age series, is the same. It's just a different combination of garments, different types of garments. Next, we have Bustle Fashions, 1885 to 1887. And this book, along with the next book, chronologically, uses a different drafting system. So this uses a drafting system called the National Garment Cutter System, and the patterns in the book come from the National Garment Cutter System, but also from a publication called The Voice of Fashion, and they both use the same system. And it is the same idea. This still uses your bust measurement, so just one measurement for the upper half of outfits, and then the waist measurement for the lower half. And it's kind of the same. Initially, these systems came not just with the tapes, but also with, as you can see here, curves and rulers to make it easy to draft. But these rulers, well, not the tape measures, but the rulers, like the curves and stuff, you can just use modern ones and it will more or less give you the same results. I have not seen any of the National Garment Cutters tapes that you can buy today, the apportion tapes, that also come with the rulers or the squares. So you make do with modern ones. And again, this one has undergarments, corsets, corset covers, coats, all kinds of things for the bustle period. So for the first bustle period. And in the back, well, this one also has things like collars and neck ruffles and other kinds of embellishments. But this is what the rulers look like in the back. And I believe that this one uses, oh, look, I was wrong. Francis Grimble does give you images of the curves so that you can print them out, attach them to cardboard, and use them yourself. So this one comes with the rulers for the full bust measurement. So you use the entire measurement of your bust, not just the half measurement. And it goes to a size 44 inch, which is not terribly inclusive, but it does go down to a size 18 inch bust, which is pretty small. This is a child. The next book, and I am absolutely going to butcher this because French and I don't see eye to eye, but this is the Directoire Revival Fashions 1888-1889. This is a second bustle period book, and it uses the same drafting system as the previous book. It uses the National Garment Cutter. The patterns also come from the Voice of Fashion, so sort of very similar. And these books that I've been talking about, they're all by Frances Grimble, and you can buy most of them still, and I will try to leave links below for them. So again, same system, so they will look pretty similar, just slightly different time period. Okay. And coats. Again, and also comes with ideas for embellishments and other kinds of details, and then the rulers again in the back, and obviously a glossary of all the words that you might not know what they are so that you can figure out their meaning. Now, Frances Grimble does have other books, including this one here called The Voice of Fashion. This one is from 1900, so it's not 19th century, but it will become important in a moment and we will get to it. But as you can see, there is a gap between the 1887 Directoire Revival book and then The Voice of Fashion in 1900. Unfortunately, Frances Grimble gives us nothing for the 1890s, which is where Christina Harris comes in. And Christina Harris has two books, both of which cover all of the 1890s. These books, although they are a lot thinner than Grimble's books and have a lot less information, they are great for that void that the Grimble books leave. However, there is a caveat. There is a huge caveat here. Christina Harris does not give you the rulers to draft this. Christina Harris doesn't even seem to know that the patterns that she printed in these two books were drafted with apportioning systems and apportioning rulers. In fact, the way that she tells you how to work with these patterns and how to reproduce them is wrong. She gives you a few ways to do it. One is basically just draft it with the measurements on the diagrams and then adjust to your size. So that is like working with a single size pattern that then you still have to grade for yourself. She talks about enlarging by spreading. She talks about enlarging by using a grid system, but she is completely unaware, as far as I can tell in these books, that actually these were apportioned drafting systems. And she does take all of the patterns from The Voice of Fashion. So lucky for us, we can turn to Grimble to make up for the enormous oversight in the Christina Harris books. But before I get into a lot of detail about that, let's have a quick look inside the Harris's books. So let's start with this one. It's 59 authentic turn of the century fashion patterns, and very short introduction. And here you can see she gives you the grids method for enlarging, the grading method, spreading method, but absolutely nothing about apportioning. And here you do have things for children. We have, coats, dresses, etc. And what I like about these books, the Harris's books, is that she tells you the season for the original publication and the year, so you kind of sort of know. And I can't remember off the top of my head if the Grimble books do that or not. They might, but I just find the visibility of these ones so much better. So that's what they look like, right? Pretty much the same as the Grimble books. And then nothing. That is the end. And the other one looks more or less the same. So they both, as I said, cover the 1890s. There is no overlap between the two of them, but they do cover the same decade. Now let's talk about the rulers that you can use to draft the patterns in Christina Harris's books. There is some talk on the internet that you can use another book from Frances Grimble called The Edwardian Modeste to draft the patterns in the Harris's books. That is actually not correct. That book by Grimble uses a completely different drafting system, and in fact it takes two measurements into account, not just your bust, to draft. And if it works with the Harris's books, is, I don't know, serendipity rather than actual design. However, you can use rulers from Grimble's other books. So Grimble has denied this publicly. She has said that you can't use her rulers for Harris's books because they're not the same. But I think when she said that, she had been referring to the rulers in the Edwardian Modeste. But the book that I have here, The Voice of Fashion, comes from The Voice of Fashion, as does Christina Harris's books and Frances Grimble's Bustle Area and Directoire Revival. That is always going to trip me up. So they are both, not both, all four of them are The Voice of Fashion. However, Frances Grimble has said that the drafting system for The Voice of Fashion changed sometime in the late 19th century. And so I went into a deep dive about this, which actually wasn't that deep. It didn't take me that long to find this information, but it does in fact change. It changed in 1895. So the Voice of Fashion patterns before 1895 used, as I mentioned earlier, the National Garment Cutting System. And then after 1895, or sometime in 1895, they start using a system called the diamond cutting system, which is the one that we have here. So in Harris's books, the patterns between 1890 and 1894 can be drafted using Frances Grimble's Directoire Revival rulers, which are the National Garment Cutting System, or even the Bustle Fashions book. It's the same rulers, same cutting system. The patterns between 1896 and 1899 can be drafted using the rulers from The Voice of Fashion. Let me show you quickly here. The book looks more or less the same. The rulers look very similar. And I haven't actually looked at what the differences are concretely, but they do change in 1895. Now, what do you do for the patterns of 1895? That's a good question, because I could not find when exactly. Hey, so Editing June here. My camera very rudely cut off, which I did realize, and you're gonna see me do an outro in the same clothes that I was wearing before in the rest of the video, but I didn't realize that this is where it had actually cut off. What I was saying here is that unfortunately, I couldn't find exactly when in 1895 The Voice of Fashion changed from using the National Garment Cutting System to using the diamond cutting system. And so if you're using a pattern from 1895 from one of Harris's books, then you may want to try both systems and see which one actually works. I haven't tried this myself, so I don't know. I am a professionally trained historian, but I am at the mercy of the sources, and I could not find the answer to this. I'm sure the answer exists somewhere, but it wasn't somewhere that was accessible to me. So I can't tell you for sure. Sorry? If you have the Christina Harris books and you don't have any of these Frances Grimble books, you don't actually have to buy them for the rulers. Somebody else has duplicated these rulers from originals independent of Frances Grimble, and I will leave a link in the description below where you can buy those. She has the diamond cutting system, and then she also has the American cutting system, which is the system used in the Edwardian Modeste, which is a different system. Unfortunately, she does not have the National Garment Cutting System, so if you want to draft the things that use that scale in Harris's books, you do have to buy one of Grimble's books. So that is a very long-winded way of saying that there are options out there for 19th century patterns outside of the commercial patterns that you can buy today. And there might be, as I said earlier, a variety of reasons why you might want to do that. But I think more importantly, there is a lot more choice. There's a lot more variety in these books that I've shown you than there is in the commercial pattern world. So you can draft things that you wouldn't be able to have otherwise. And I am not going to be drafting anything today, but if you are interested in watching me draft from one of these books, please let me know in the comments and I will take it into consideration. Thank you so much for watching. I bet this is a long video. I will see you next time. Bye.